My internet.
There we are.
Here we go. Hey everybody, how's it going? This me, William, WJR Parks, and Janelle Coberly, my co-author. We're back with Writing Raven Universe, and today we have our special guest, Ro Morgan. She also is a dark fantasy writer, so that's pretty good for us because we love dark fantasy characters. So, so I'm glad everybody could join us again, and hopefully we can give you a new author or some new books that you might be interested in, and perhaps new tips for any new writers that are decide to jump in.
Yeah.
So, Ro, tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you get into writing and what you currently are working on.
Well, I have been I'm a geek. I've been a convention. I go to conventions and totally into Lord of the Rings and numerous fandoms. And I think Twilight was real hot at the time. A lot of people don't care for Twilight, but it was pretty hot at the time because there's a lot of people that do care about Twilight. I learned a lot from Twilight fans as far as why they were into the universe. But so about that time, I woke up one morning with this lonely vampire woman character in my head. And I was kind of like, well, hello. And I was like, well, who are you? And she was just kind of lamenting her fate that she couldn't be around her daughter anymore. She had a young adult teenager daughter, and she couldn't be around her anymore. And she was just lamenting her loneliness and just her fate in life. And I was so intrigued with it that I kind of wrote it down a little bit. And then I wrote a whole one-page lament about what she was unhappy about. And I decided, this might make the basis of a good story. I'm really intrigued with her and where she came from and why is she so unhappy. And so I did a little research and found a couple of things that really stuck with me. One is that writing is like any art or craft. You have to practice to get good at it. It's like painting or singing or anything that's in the arts realm. You have to do it. I'm putting a lot of hours practicing before you really start getting good at it.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I read was an interview with Stephanie Meyer, who wrote Twilight. And the question had been asked, well, did you write it for young adult or, who'd you write it for? Because all these older women seem to like your story too. And she said she wrote it for herself.
Oh.
And I thought in my head, okay, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to write the story of this vampire woman for myself, and I'm going to use that to practice my writing so that when I can maybe get good and then I can write other things. And so that's what I did. I just started and I sat down. I didn't know anything about writing. I just sat down and started writing it. And I'd come home from work and relax for a few hours. My husband would go to bed and I'd crack open the computer and I'd write till about 2 in the morning. And I did that almost every night. On weekends, it was worse. I would go to bed till about 5 in the morning, go to sleep for a few hours. I'd get up and I'd write round the clock. And
Wow.
I did that for about 5.5 months. And
How much?
about 5.5 months.
Wow.
I aged myself 5 years in 5 months. It happens when you don't sleep. But the story was so compelling, and I just felt this need. I kind of felt like I was channeling her story, right? That she was on this other plane of existence and she wanted me to tell her story. And then when the second character, Nicholas, came in, it was the both of them kind of pressuring me. And I always felt this pressure to get this out as fast as I could. And I would think about it when I was at work on my lunch break. I'd go for walks and I put in music that I write to music a lot. I use music for to help set mood. And the story would just be tumbling in my head, and I couldn't wait to get home and write it. And I'm what they call a pantser. All I knew when I started writing the book was that I knew the beginning, and I knew in the middle that she was going to meet this guy, Nicholas, and I knew how it ended. I had those 3 scenes fixed in my head from the very beginning. I didn't know what was going to happen in between. The scenes started developing. And I felt like they were they were airplanes circling over a runway waiting for their chance to land. And I was never quite sure what was going to happen when they would land or exactly what was going to come out of their doors when they landed. And so it was really an interesting process, but it just, and there was so much of it that was a surprise. There was one scene where there is they've had an argument and she's gone out to he's got this big, beautiful topiary garden that he maintains. And there's this new topiary figure out there of these two leopards kind of entwined, and you can't tell if they're fighting or loving or what have you. And she walks and she's like, when did he put these there? And I'm looking over my shoulder going, where did these come from? I had no idea they were going to be there, but they were just there. When I walked out to the garden, I was like, okay, what happens next? And all of a sudden there they were. So that's how I got started. When I got done with the book, I didn't know what I was going to do with it. I had a friend who was involved in a local writers group, and they said I could bring it and have it critiqued. And so they critiqued the first couple chapters, and then afterwards the editor for the group asked if she could read the whole thing. I was kind of impressed with that. I'd had a few people test read it, my daughter and her friends and one of my friends, and they all said, yeah, you need to publish this. So then I got serious about learning how to write properly. I spent a lot of time on writing blogs, learning writing rules, because I've had business writing years ago in college, but I didn't know really anything about, I couldn't remember my grammatical rules as far as, how you do dialogue or anything like that. So I learned a lot of it from going through the blogs. And one of the rules I learned was you don't ever want to hyphenate an ly word with another word. You don't hyphenate ly words. So I was like, oh, okay. So every time I learned a new rule like that, I would go all the way back through my novel, all 120,000 words of it, and fix every one of those problems. And in the meantime, I was also tightening up my sentence structure, and so it was just I kept going through and editing and re-editing and re-editing. And then when I was also going to a lot of book fairs, I signed up to be a volunteer at the big San Francisco Writers Conference they hold every year. It's a multi-day conference and costs lots of money to go to, like $800. At that time, $800 for the whole conference. But I went as a volunteer, so I didn't have to pay for anything. And I learned a lot at those conferences. And in 2010, February of 2010, everybody was very anti-self-publishing. And in February of 2011, it flipped 180 degrees, and they were saying, you should all be looking into self-publishing. So I had this finished vampire novel. The couple of agents that I had looked at it, loved the writing, but they said vampires were not in anymore and they didn't want it.
Yeah.
So I had just put it away and was working on some other stuff. And after that conference, when they said you should look into self-publishing, I thought, well, I've got this finished book in my novel in my drawer. I've got a book in a drawer. I'll self-publish it. So 2 years after I began writing it, I published it myself. And that's how I got into writing. And then I belonged to a couple of writers clubs, so I contributed stories to anthologies and to periodicals and things like that.
Wow. And so because I got one book up right now, and this is the one that you're talking about that you first started, or?
Yeah, it was Watcher. Watcher was book one of the Chosen, is the first book in the series.
Oh, there we go.
Yes,
it's a beautiful cover. I love the red and the blue. It has a great contrast there, and it pops really well. So I think that's a really good eye catcher there. So I love those kind of covers.
They did such a good job too, because when you look at it, when you actually have you can look it up close, you can actually see the satin sheen on the dress. It's just beautiful. It's just beautiful. And they did a great job with it, and it really depicts some of the conflict in the story. She's filled with a lot of internal conflict, and much of her life has been spent in the wilds. And when she meets this sophisticated guy, he's basically trying to tame her down. So the cover is one of those that does tell the story. It's a beautiful. And when I got done with that, I was still actually hadn't even published it yet when I started book 2. So
Oh, really?
I republished Watcher with its current cover in October of 2017, and then a couple weeks later published Runner. So this is the sequel. And
That's very nice too. It's very nice. Like the color contrast, and it's really nice.
yeah, they did a really nice job. Again, you know, as you can see, the story there is taking place in San Francisco, the most of it. Watcher, that's actually Pikes Peak that she's looking at, and most of Watcher takes place in Colorado, at the base of Pikes Peak.
And then you have this next one too as well.
So this is Monster, and this is a prequel to Watcher. This is the story. We meet Sunny here when she is still human. And we get a glimpse into her human life before disaster strikes and she becomes something else. And again, I thought they did a really good job. She's overlooking Sonora. That's actually supposed to be Sonora.
Oh, really?
The Sierra Nevada mountains. Yeah. And so she's coming in from a life in the wild.
Yeah.
And I've written 2 novellas that accompany the books so far. One is called The Games Monsters Play. And that was originally a story. I had been asked to participate in a vampire anthology. And I knew I wanted to use something from The Chosen World. So I started writing this story, and it starts out with a gal that we meet in Watcher. She's kind of an antagonist in Watcher. And so this started out to be her story, but a new character came in and he very quickly took it over. So it's now his story, and his name is Colin. And Colin, he's kind of I just want to say he's kind of like a spy master. And his nickname is the Chameleon. So he snuck his way into the Games Monsters Play, and then he managed to sneak his way into Runner as well. And he ended up with a prominent role in Runner. And I didn't see that one coming at all, but that's what he did. And the role he plays is, I've had people tell me he's their favorite character in that book.
Isn't that how interesting how certain characters can just get in there and just grow and just start like, okay, I'm going to sneak into this book. I'm going to sneak into this one.
So new writers then pay attention to what they're saying here, because when a new character comes in, go with it. Don't just toss it aside. Go with it.
Yeah, it's really important. It's really important to pay attention to those inspirations too. So I get this. Sometimes I get what they call shower inspirations, and I don't know if it has to do with the negative ions in the shower spray. I've read other people actually experience the same phenomena, but one day I was still working on Watcher, and I might have been wrapping it up, but I had these 3 characters walk into my head while I'm in the shower, and one of them was a big half Indian Native American dude, and then I had a Scottish dude and a little tiny Creole gal. And I knew what it looked like right off the bat. I didn't have their names yet, but I thought, okay, they're going to be in Runner. I just know they're going to have a role. I'm not sure what it is. So I kind of wrote it down so I wouldn't forget about them. And then I attended a writing workshop up in Oregon. And at that, it was actually a self-publishing workshop. We went up there to learn how to self-publish our books. And on the way back, my husband was driving back. One of the things I had learned at this workshop was that it's really helpful if you can write short stories and novellas that are part of your story world if you're doing a series. And then when they're published in anthologies or what have you, that can help funnel people to your series. So they're kind of like a series magnet in a way, because you're introducing people to the world. Put an excerpt from your main novel into the back of the book, so it can kind of help bring people to your writing. And so I thought, okay, well, I'll write a short story about one of these people. So I came up with his name. His name is Taz, and Taz now has his own novella called The Last Trace. And we meet Taz in the 1840s in the mountains of the Montana Territory. And Taz ended up being Taz and the other two, Red and Chia, ended up being very prominent in Runner. So always pay attention to those little snippets of inspiration, because you never know when they're going to come in and be a key component. They fit a beautiful role in that book. And again, Runner was another one. I wasn't real sure what was going to happen through Runner. I kind of had a couple of ideas about how it was going to end. But everything in the middle, I really wasn't sure. And this story just kind of flowed and rolled with it. And what I do is I just follow my characters. I just follow their day-to-day life, and I follow my characters as to what's happening to them. And anytime it starts to feel like the story is starting to slow down and get a little boggy, then I have to sit and think, okay, well, what's going to happen? Something needs to happen here. And then it just shows up. So I'm not a plotter by any chance. It's all seat of the pants, but I do have a basic outline in my head. It's not even written down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's one of the main things that I do. Like I said, I'm totally not a plotter. I've said that in past interviews that I've done. I pretty much do the same thing that you do. Yeah, I see the beginning. I see a little bit of the end. I mean, a little bit of the middle, but not very much. What I do see is the end. I always know how I want the ending to happen. Doesn't matter what story. Weirdly enough, I always know where I want the ending to go, and because of that, I usually know how to fill everything in from the middle and the beginning. And because I know a lot of authors, when they're writing, as soon as they get into the middle, they get stuck.
Happens a lot.
Yeah, and that's one of the most dangerous things about writing, is because you hit into that big old desert of endless sand of trying to figure out what to go and write and how to get the conflict going. I think a lot of people usually struggle that when they're beginning with writing. Did you have that kind of problem when you first started writing? Did you have anything when you were writing in the middle?
Not really. I kind of knew key scenes in the middle. I knew when Sunny was going to meet Nicholas. I already had that in my head, and I'm very visual. When I'm writing scenes, I see them unveil in my head like a movie. Mm-hmm. So I'm just trying to translate. And I always felt like they were funneling me their story, and I'm just typing as fast as I can. With Runner, I knew that and they call it an inciting incident in writer language.
Oh, yeah.
I knew an inciting incident was going to be when Sunny meets Taz and his crew. And so with me, it seems, meeting new characters is always a great way to help get through those middle muddles, I guess would be a good word. Yeah. You get through the middle muddles. New characters are a great way to avoid that. Now you have new potential for conflict and just more complications to your character's life. But I think the central thing with any book is your character needs to have a problem. Your characters, and the story is how they deal with that problem. So in Sunny's case, her problem was she got changed into this thing she doesn't want to be. She's lonely as heck. And she's just really unhappy with her life. And her story is how she overcomes those things in her life. How does she, deal with the fact that she can't be part of her daughter's life, even though it just tortures her that she watches her daughter. That's the name of the book, is Watcher, because she's watching her daughter. But she's afraid to, she can't have contact with her daughter because everybody thinks she's dead. She was, the story opens where she's watching her daughter put flowers on her empty grave. And so that's for her. And that's why, even though this is dark fantasy, in a way, some people might consider it literary fiction or women's fiction or whatever, because it's not, like a lot of urban fantasy, it's all about the hero saving the world. Yeah. And there is some of that in my series. We definitely, as the series moves on, it definitely turns into a little bit more of world saving. But right now, she's just trying to save her own family and save her own life.
Yeah.
So,
One of our viewers here is saying that plotting is really good for her, but she has trouble fleshing out her characters, and getting those important details are difficult for her.
For him, actually, that's one of my buddies, but Malachi Brown, yeah. Again, he's a plotter, so again, plotting is my strongest aspect. The overall story seems easier to me. Fleshing out character and getting those important details has always been so difficult for me.
So my question to Ro is, fleshing out a character, do you have a certain technique that you use to do that?
Well, here's what I would recommend when you're having trouble getting some depth in the character. Write something outside of your story from that character's viewpoint. Put yourself all the way into their head, first person, present tense. There's no deeper you can get into a character. I happen to write first person, present tense in much of my stories. I prefer it over past tense.
Okay.
Because that really puts you into their skin. You are right there with their thoughts. And if you do that, that will help you develop that character. So when you go back to your story, you know more about him. So one of the things that really helped me with Runner was I had written Taz's backstory in the last trace. So when he entered into Runner, he was fully fleshed out, because I knew what made him tick at that point. And then it was easy to fill in with his crew. And eventually I will write their backstories as well. But I think it's really important. Go write a backstory for that character. Where they came from, how they got to where they're at, what have been their struggles in life, and how did they cope with them? You know, were they noble how they coped with them, or did they go, drink and drug it away? And that will tell you how they are now. To figure out where they came from and who they were, that will help you figure out where they are now. And I think that's really important. So that means you have to do things like, well, how did they grow up? They have two parents in the household. Was it, did they grow up happy, or was there problems in the household? Was there an alcoholic parent? Or was it a single mom struggling with 3 kids? How did the siblings have a relationship with this person? What was their social status in school? Were they picked on? Were they the bully? Were they, just, so answering those kinds of questions can really help with developing a character.
Yeah.
Funny that you say that, because I also like this book right here, Character Traits. It's one of the things, because I was telling Janelle and that I like to go back and forth in this book, because this book tells you anything from it really almost a walk, kind of like glance of psychology, because it tells you anything from the traits of what's happened when the traits of a grieving person, how the person got there, what's the background as far as why they got there, then goes into the dark triad of psychology as well, when it's concerning Machiavellian or sociopaths, psychopaths and stuff like that. Anything like that is
who was the author of that book?
Flesh out your characters.
Yeah. Who was the author of that book?
Linda N. Edelstein, PhD, I think. I could be wrong there. Let me see if I can get it without the light glaring there.
Tip it forward a little bit.
Edelstein,
Yeah, there you go.
okay.
Edelstein.
Okay.
Edelstein.
Yeah, and you mentioned
And
something.
I use that, and actually for a lot of the characters, and going along with your thought of actually writing a background with me and Janelle, like we have a character right now that we work with. Her name is Leonette, and she's one of our half angels. But her background that I knew about was because I wrote her in the first books in our Raven universe. All these characters are actually within this book, so I had a plan when I first wrote it to actually write the background of these characters, so I knew how they were, and they already had a sense of life behind them, because I had already created them as secondary characters
Right.
from here. But because I knew what their background was, I didn't have to actually write the biography in the sense, or the traits and whatnot, because they're already there. So it helped me create all this other world from these characters that were essentially non-important in the story.
Well, and see, what's really cool with writing your character's backstory is that you can take that later on and publish it. It can go into, you can submit it as a short story to a periodical or to an anthology, or just, if you're doing self-publishing, publish it yourself as a companion. So the way I have my book set up, my novels, which is Monster Watcher Runner, that is the Chosen series. Then I have World of the Chosen, which is a branch-off series, and that's the games monsters play, and The Last Trace, and the other books that are going to go with that. Those are my side character stories. But put that time that you're putting into developing your character, put it to good use so that you can actually get a saleable product out of it. So write the backstory. That's always a great way to flesh them out, and always focus. Everybody has troubles in their life, so focus on their dark moments. Focus on what tragedies have they experienced in their life? Have they been divorced, or did they, a spouse die, or a parent die, or, in my case, did the character almost die and he was given the choice? You can die or you can be this other thing.
And that's a good point too, as well. Is another thing is just like real life, true character comes out when you're at your worst point, in a sense. Right. So when you put your character through their worst nightmares and their worst points, or you test their limits, that's when readers actually start connecting, because then it shows their true character. Like a character, you can write about a character and they're always being the superhero, but what does that superhero really have to go through when they go through real problems? Like, they have everything bad going on. Are they gonna like snap at somebody, or are they gonna still be calm? Are they gonna throw a cat across the street at a car, or are they going to be like, okay, I'm good with the cat, I'm just going to go by? It tests out and brings out their real true selves, and that's kind of the idea of a story as well. Is like you want to test these characters. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's exactly it. You do. They do need to have some adversity going on. And the story needs that too. You always have to have some sort of conflict. So unresolved conflict, there should always be some sort of thread of unresolved conflict throughout the story. I mean, okay, so let's say they accomplish this one thing and that conflict isn't there anymore, but all of a sudden there should still be something else. So that's the same thing with the character is, maybe they've got unresolved issues from their past that influence how they work in the future. I see we have another question. Oh, okay, that's from Malachi.
Yeah, he's very helpful. Very helpful information. Thank you. Sort of taking my characters and method acting as I am them.
Yes, exactly. And you don't have to write it in first person. It just really allows you to get deep into their heads when they do. I know my two novellas that are the side stories. Those are third person. So we're not. But I write very close third person.
Deep point of view.
Novels, the Chosen series are all first person.
How did you decide to you said you write first person past tense? Is that what you said?
I write first person present tense.
Present tense. How did you decide to go that way instead of third person? Was there something that triggered that, or?
That's how the story was coming out to me. That's how the story. She was showing me her story as it was happening now. She wasn't telling me her story after it happened. She was showing me her story as it was happening now. And I just wrote it that way. I don't know. I didn't know enough about writing at that point in time to know it wasn't commonly done like that. I just wrote it from her. I was in her head and in Nicholas's head, because later there are also, Nicholas has, in fact, that was an interesting part of it. When I got done with the book, he was very upset because, I couldn't stop thinking about him, and he was very upset because he felt like he didn't have a voice. So I actually went back and put in diary entries from his perspective.
Oh.
Then he left me alone. It was really the strangest thing. I still think they're out there in the ether somewhere. No, I wrote it first person present, and a lot of people don't like that, but it has to be done a certain way. I had trouble because I had a lot of I So the difference for new writers, I'll explain. You have a scenario where your character is watching a fox run across the road, and if it was a third person, you would say, George sees the fox run across the road. No, George saw the fox run across the road. That's third person past tense. That's typically how things are done in most storytelling. It's past tense, he saw, and we're saying George. Now, if you want to move that to first person, it would be, let me think about that for a second. How would I say that? I saw the fox run across the road. So now you are George. So I saw the fox run around. So the first one is George saw the fox run across the road. That's third person. I saw the fox run across the road. That's third person past tense. The way I write, it would be, I see the fox run across the road.
Yeah.
It's happening now. So one of the things that I had was I had an awful lot of I see, I feel in my story, and that was one in my learning my writing. I had to go through and eliminate. One of my early beta readers said, "Yeah, you have I in there too much." I had to go through and figure out ways to construct the sentences so that we knew that it was coming from the character, but I didn't have to say I did this. The book that really made a huge impact on me on how to do that well was The Hunger Games. The Hunger Games is all written in first person present tense.
Say it again. I didn't catch it.
The Hunger Games.
Oh, The Hunger Games, right.
Hunger Games, written in first person present tense. It's done very, very well. And after I read her book, I said, oh, that's how she does it. And I went back and edited my book again for about the 30th time. That was before I published.
So that's another book for new writers. That just goes to show you that you don't have to go with the norm. And the norm, like Rose said, is third person. You can go any way it comes out best for you, and then go back and make your corrections and tweak it until it works.
I was going to say the Receptor by Alan Glynn is actually an interesting book because he actually jumps between third person past tense and first person present tense. Okay. And it's very interesting how he does it, because he's actually writing about his great grandfather in the third person past tense, and then in the first person present tense, he's writing about the great grandson. And I couldn't read this book actually because I'm currently writing the third novel for Raven and doing Leonette with co-authoring with Janelle, of course, because it kept throwing my mind off. Because I remember when I used to write screenplays for trying to get them into TV or anything like that, everything in the screenplay usually was present tense because you want the action to happen like in present time, like it's happening right there, because that's how everybody watches TV or movies. But when I transitioned from that into writing a novel, it threw my mind for a curve, because I couldn't. Every now and then, when I'm writing in third person past tense, it would start transitioning into present tense. And I was like, okay, I can't do this. I have to at least give myself at least a few months of rest before I start either on the novel or go back to a screenplay.
I think that's for new authors, I think they need to choose which one they want to go with and then do that one, learn how to do it before they start trying to tackle maybe a first person or something like that.
Well, I've heard that third person is usually the best one to go with for especially new authors.
Learn how to do that first. And then,
to me, that seems like it's the most difficult, because to me, it's harder. It would be harder to get in to really draw your reader into the character, because you're not in the character's head. You're watching it all from out here. And to me, when I try to write third person, it's harder for me to do that. And maybe just because I learned to writing first person present tense. I do know that a lot of readers don't like first person present tense, and they won't read a book if it's in first person present tense, which is fine. That's their, their prerogative. But Suzanne Collins made a bunch of money off of Hunger Games writing first person text. So really, if your story is good enough, if you're a good enough storyteller, the readers aren't going to care what tense it's in. And that means you have to be able to capture their attention with that very first sentence, that very first page. And that first sentence, that very first sentence is the most critical. For like with Watcher, my first line in the book is, I watch my daughter, the sunlight dancing across her long dark hair, cradle her swollen belly as she, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble reading. Let me switch glasses since those are not working very well, they're too dark. I watch my daughter, the sunlight dancing across her long dark hair, cradle her swollen belly as she kneels to place the flowers on my empty grave. So,
very
that's
good.
A good book.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've got empty grave. Okay, wait a minute. You're watching her put the flowers on your own empty grave, and then she's cradling her swollen belly. So there's a whole bunch of emotion in there because she's watching her pregnant daughter, and then it goes on from there.
Yeah.
And so I think that's something that no matter what tense you write in, if you've got that first line hook, you need to draw the reader in, and they will move past it very quickly if your story, if the writing is engaging enough.
Now, did you hear what Rose said? New writers, he said that's called a hook. So if you're wondering what a hook is, that's what it is. That's what's called a hook, and it's generally your first sentence. It's used to grab your reader and pull them in, and want them, once they get a little further, you've got them. I mean, they want to read on.
The first 50 pages is like, I consider like the very main hook, but like not the main hook, but the overall hook of if they're gonna really get into your novel. But the very first sentence you ever have, or within like the first 2 lines, you have to get a good hook.
That's right.
And some people say you don't really need to. Some people have a different philosophy behind it. I kind of tend to try to do as many as I can to put in a good hook. But I've even read a couple of books that I have on writing, and they say you don't necessarily need a hook. But I don't know. I've always stayed with what I know, and
do you agree with that, Ro?
I think if you get,
I was asking Ro if she agreed with that. I don't agree with that. Do you agree with that, Ro?
No. In fact, there's a book out. I believe it's by Donald Maas, Maas, big in the publishing industry. And I believe it's the name of the book is the first 5 words, or the first 5 pages.
Oh, yeah.
It's the first 5 pages.
First 5 pages. That's an excellent book.
But it's to me, it's all the way to the first. That's first sentence. That's the first sentence is what really, because people's attention spans are so short these days.
Yeah.
And they're looking at your book on Amazon or wherever. If you don't grab them by the throat in that first paragraph, you're not going to catch them. They're going to be gone. Yeah. They've got to be intrigued. So that is not the place you want to put in any backstory. You don't ever start out with backstory. You start out, and there needs to be something that grabs them, whether it's the intrigue of a situation or action or whatever. It has to be something that's going to make them want to know what happens next.
Yeah.
You gotta grab that curiosity and rattle it.
Starting in the middle of action is a really good way to go. If you start your scene in the middle of the action.
Yeah.
That's an
so in the middle of it's like having a good hook, start in the middle of the action if you can. Sometimes when you write a story, if you actually cut like a couple of the first paragraphs, you usually end up right into the action, or even a couple of pages. Some authors, I think, or write a lot of exposition, and you don't want to write a lot of exposition in your first page. You have to have something happening. Yeah. And the reason being is like you said, we have such a short attention span nowadays compared to like the authors from even the 80s and 70s. Yeah. Even the epic fantasy back then, they could just go into a whole almost purple prose description in the beginning of the first page, and you know that'll hold people's attention. But now it's the age of the internet, and we got to have everything quick.
Yeah.
And so you definitely, as a new writer, you definitely want to go back and check that. You definitely want to make sure that you have interest and conflict. I know me and Janelle talked about this the last episode we did. You have to have some sort of emotion tailored to that conflict, and then you have to have that tension. And if you don't, with the that kind of tells you the whole mood and the pacing for the rest of your story for the rest of the book. If you want to get some readers to stay hooked to your book for 300 pages.
Yeah, and the other thing too, because you brought up exposition, lengthy descriptions are something you want to try to not give into too much. So let's say when I'm writing a scene and we're entering into a new setting of some sort, I usually will have the character kind of register some of the key points of the setting. Like they walk into somebody's house and they note its tidiness or its decor or whatever. But you make that quick. I keep most of that to one short paragraph. And then you continue to drop in information throughout the rest of the scene, anchoring people to the setting. So I weave that, a lot of times I weave that in to attribute my dialogue. So, for example, let's say two people are having dinner or whatever, and Joe says, to Caroline, I want to break up with you. And that would be the point where you would talk about how the candlelight is flickering across his face or something like that. You bring in little bits of the setting to anchor in with your dialogue. I'm not explaining it very well, but you want to avoid long, dense descriptions of any type. Keep them to a paragraph, and then continue to throw in, weave them into the rest of the scene. You break them
not to have, what do you call it, the white room syndrome. This is my personal preference of how to do it, because I used to do comic books. I used to draw comic books, and I used to do the screenplays for trying to get into TVs or movies. I always have the establishing shot, in a sense. So in my mind, I'm also very visual. I have to figure out where my characters are going to be first. So like in comics, like in movies or whatever, you usually have your establishing shot, kind of an overall picture showing where things are going to be happening. Or if it's in a room, you still have a picture of the overall room in a sense. So you describe in novels, you kind of describe that room or that scene. And then as your description, I think like how you're saying, as you're going forward in the story, then you start adding like Jill leaned against the tree bark that was rough against her skin, and it had like the stickiness from the what do you call it, the
sap, yeah,
and then you can start adding your five senses if you can, but for the most part, I like to do the establishing scene, and then from the establishing scene give enough detail that's quick enough to at least put people where they need to be and give the reader a sense of I guess an image of where these people are going to be. And then when the people start talking or making action, then start peppering in the rest of the details of the five senses.
That's real important. Otherwise you just end up with a scene that's a bunch of talking heads. And you don't want that. So I don't use many attributes. When I'm attributing dialogue, and when I say attribute, that would be words like he said, let me think. Oh, look, the fox is walking across the road, he said. So he said is what they call the attribute, okay? Because you're establishing who said whatever the dialogue was. But I don't do a lot of that. What I do instead is I will throw in an action. For example, Oh, look, there's a fox walking across the road. Joe peers a little closer to see if he can see if there's any more. So, you know what I'm saying? We have an action that Joe does in response to what he said, instead of just saying he said.
Yeah.
So I'm saying, and when I do that, then I'm establishing Joe's the one who said it, but I'm also tying some action into it. And that's also the place you can drop in setting. As he peered through the trees, you know, oh, look, there's a fox walking across the road. Joe peered through the trees to see if there were any further fox, you know, any more foxes coming. So now you've established the trees. So you bring in the setting, you bring in some action, and you never had to use the boring word, he said. So that's how I do it. I trickle those in, but I always do when a character's entering into a new situation, especially because I do write first person, present tense. You know, I step into the room and notice that the drapes, you know, that the blue drapes are drawn, and the bed is unmade, and the books are spilled on the floor. You know, so the character needs to note major things. You don't want them going into a lengthy detail. But it helps to frame, like you said, that's that initial
paint the picture.
Yeah, the initial picture of what they're walking into.
All right, it was 5:08. So we got about, I'd say another. We were a little late today, but I'd say we got another about 5-10 minutes before I have to take off. So we'll be winding down right here.
Let me ask a few questions before we close out too. What would be the most important thing that you've learned that you would give advice to the new writers? What was the most important thing you learned as a new writer, in retrospect, of course?
Listen to the feedback from your betas, but don't embrace it too much. Some people, and when I say betas, I mean test readers, beta readers. Some people cannot be as perceptive with their critique. Look at what it is they're critiquing and not necessarily how they're recommending to fix it. So a lot of times when I have a beta reader say, oh, well, you know, there was this problem with this and I don't understand, you know, I think you should do this. I'll look at, well, what was the problem? And I'll fix it in a completely different way. But pay attention to that feedback, especially if you're getting the same feedback from more than one person on a particular scene or character or anything like that. That's a flag that you might have an issue.
Very good.
Have confidence. Be confident, and it's really scary when the first time you show somebody something you've written. It's terrifying. I go through it with every book. First time I have somebody else lay eyes on it, I'm terrified that they're going to like it, that I did my job as a storyteller, that I did the characters justice in getting their story out. Just try to be brave. Do a lot of research on the writing business. Learn what the writing business is all about. A lot of folks get into writing and they think the answer is going to be, oh, I'm just going to get an agent and I'm not going to worry about all that self-publishing stuff. I'll just get an agent and a publisher can handle all that. That is a tough road. And it's a lot harder than a lot of people realize, because what they don't realize in the beginning is how much material these agents are getting. they're just swamped submissions all the time. Learn the business. It's really important to learn the business and learn how it works and learn what they're looking for. If they're saying, well, we don't want this genre right now, okay, well, put it away and find what it is they are looking for and go write that, or make the decision to self-publish. Now, self-publishing is hard too.
Yeah.
I mean, there are so many details involved with that. Everything from how to format your books to the process to finding editors. My biggest advice is if you're going to self-publish, spend the money and get an editor. Because if you don't have your books professionally edited, your readers are going to rip them apart for anything that's considered a typo or a misspelling or, whatever. I've seen reviews on other people's stuff that, oh, this person needed an editor. There were all these missing words and blah, 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 blah. And so I've always used editors, and I highly recommend that you spend money on an editor. The second thing you want to spend money on is a cover artist. And you want to go with somebody who's been doing this for a while, not your friend who just happens to be handy with graphics. Because the thing that I've learned recently that's really important is your covers need to fit your genre. And if your cover doesn't fit your genre, then the people who are looking for books in your genre aren't going to necessarily recognize your book as being part of that. And it's a problem I struggle with right now, because my books are kind of a mishmash. I can fit into paranormal romance. I can fit into urban fantasy. I can fit into dark fantasy. I can even slide a little bit into horror. But what does my cover say? At least for Watcher, most people think it's paranormal romance. And there is a lot of romance in that book. Not as much as, there's more in that book than there are in the others. And in the others, the covers don't look like romance. So be real aware when you're working with a cover artist that know know your genre. And a lot of beginning writers don't really understand the genre. Read up on the genre. Go find some definitions on what is urban fantasy, what is paranormal romance, what is romance. Romance has to have that happily ever after, and if it doesn't have a happily ever after, or maybe it will later, but if it doesn't have a happily ever after, it's not a romance.
Right.
And the readers have a lot of expectations about that. So if you're writing sci-fi, you've got to have your sci-fi looking cover.
I wanted to mention too, before we close out, that Ro is an award-winning author, and tell us a little bit about that before we close out, Ro, about your award.
Yeah, Watcher, the book with the red dress and the blue cover, won the International Vampire Film and Arts Festival Silver Stake Award last year, in 2019, and that is one of their literary awards. And then Runner, I put it in for 2020. Runner was nominated for that award in 2020. So even though my books are about vampires, and I do, that is a main topic, a lot of people, though, that don't like vampires also enjoy my stories. So that's where I shapeshift a little bit with my material, because it appeals to a broader audience than vampires. But yeah, I just had learned about the festival and learned and there's very few awards given out for that genre. The only other people really putting out awards of any notability is the Horror Writers Association. But theirs are all genre of horror and dark fantasy and urban fantasy. So, yeah, and the other thing is to use what you know. When you write, use what you know. I have traveled a little bit. I actually took a trip to Romania several years ago with David Stoker, who is the great-grandnephew of Bram Stoker, the author of Dracula. And we went on a tour through the country following the footsteps, or following the life of Vlad Tepes, who is an actual historical character, and the fictional Dracula, who is sort of based on Tepes. And so that's also, use what you know. My stories are all set in places where I've spent some time, so I know how it feels. Because it's not, you can research all you want and get imagery on Google about what a place looks like, but you're not going to know how it feels. You're not going to know how the people talk, or the atmosphere, or anything. So it's always good to use settings that you're familiar with. And I've done a lot of research in which I actually go for drives where I know my story is going to take place. And sometimes it's even after I've already written it while it's still in draft. I'll take a drive up there and I'll learn so much from it. When I wrote Monster, we took a drive in October up to the Sierras, where it takes place here in the Sierra Nevadas. And one of the things that I found was after a lot of the pines had lost their needles. And when we drove out to a reservoir, there was a lot of wind that day, and the pine needles were covering the road. But as the car went past, they were swirling in our wake, kind of like water behind the boat. And it was the coolest thing. So I was able to incorporate that into the story, because you want the reader right there with you. You want the reader feeling the same things your characters are feeling. And so it's really important to be able to when you use settings, to capture all of that and be familiar with where you're writing. And if not, take a trip.
Yeah.
Kind of hard though if you write science fiction.
Oh yeah, science fiction, yeah, for sure. Well, there you have it, guys.
Thank you so much, Ro, for joining us today. That was a really good insight that you gave us. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, hopefully you come back again. Like I said, we're just starting out the channel. We're focusing on new writers because me and Janelle are still no experts, even though we have quite a few books out there. So we're hoping to get other authors in here and to interview. For everybody that that watched, and hopefully we get more watchers because we'll share this video. If y'all know anybody that's an author or would like to be on the show, please message me on my Facebook, or you can also go to our YouTube and leave any kind of comments because we share both on Facebook and YouTube. Again, I am William, WJR Parks, and Janelle Coberly. You can find our books on Amazon and Kindle stores. Just look up our names, again, WJR Parks or Janelle Coberly. Ro, where can people find you?
I have Facebook. I have a Facebook writer page, and I'm on Amazon. I have a author page on Amazon, so you can find my books on Amazon. That's the only place they're available at this point. And my newest book, Monster, is due to be released in mid-April.
April.
So,
Yeah.
All right.
And I do have a website, www.romorgan.com, and that's MORGON. And you can go on there and learn more about my stories and the characters, as well as where to purchase my books.
Okay, and I'll make sure to post some links on the YouTube channel. That way people can click on your website and find your books.
All right.
All right, everybody, thank you again for joining us. Hopefully we brought you some good tips, and for any future viewers as well. Thanks, Malachi, for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
All right, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for
everybody.